Good morning. So we had fun last night. We were hanging out.
We did. Yeah, not too much fun, though.
No, yes. Actually, she left. She's like, I have an interview in the morning. Yeah, I have an interview too, but I'm staying. So
You get to ask all the
Yeah.
questions, so.
that is true. Let me just open up this. All right. So I guess I should have left with you. Well, first, anyway, just talk a little bit about Kimberly-Clark. I'm sure everyone has heard of you guys, just as I said, you've been around a long time, but just in terms of what you do with them, and give us a brief overview.
Sure, no problem. First, I just want to say thank you to Lisa and the team for having me here. It's been wonderful. I've met a lot of really great people and enjoyed learning from all of you so far and look forward to learning more. For those of you who don't know Kimberly-Clark, there's some brands up on the screen. We're 150 years old. This is our birthday year. We're celebrating. And we have a number of brands. We are in over 175 countries around the world, and we are in service of a better care for a better world. We have essential products that you all probably actually have in your home but might not know come from Kimberly-Clark. Our businesses are organized actually in two different business units. So we have our personal care, which has our diapers, wipes, feminine care, and adult care brands. And then we have our family care brands, which are facial tissues, your bath care, as well as your hand towels. We also are...
Am I supposed to?
Yeah.
I don't know what you are.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got to be at Kimberly-Clark. So I was very fortunate in having worked with them for a few years before I came there. My career was spent agency side for almost, and I hesitate to say this number, it actually makes me a little dated and old, I think, for over 20 years. And when I worked on Kimberly-Clark, I really, really enjoyed their culture and their people. And when I had the opportunity to interview for my current role, which is the lead of integrated media, I was blessed and fortunate. I felt to really rejoin this company, and it felt like coming back home. So in my current role there, I'm responsible for their paid, earned, shared, and owned assets and websites. So that is new to the company. Typically, paid media was off in a silo by itself, and they brought it together with our earned, shared, and owned assets recently.
Yeah, and we've had you guys at our events before, and
Yeah.
I know you're going through a lot of transformation, and we're going to specifically talk about the video transformation.
Yeah.
But before we even get into that, why did you need this? Like, what was happening, maybe what was not necessarily wrong, but could have been better, that you realized, okay, we need to just, change things up a bit?
Yeah, before I dive into that a little bit, I do want to talk about how we as a company changed. So I mentioned now that our paid, earned, shared, and owned came together. We actually recently went through a restructure in the organization, and I'm sitting under a group called Advanced Marketing Capabilities, where we brought together our paid data strategy, our insights and analytics team. We're starting an in-house creative content. We brought our packaging and design groups together so that we could all work in service and help support our brands to build capabilities and best-in-class practices. So we weren't really that different from other CPG companies in the past, where we were a bit behind in our digital transformation, and we were working probably against ourselves instead of working together. And we realized that we needed to bring those capabilities together if we wanted to get ahead. And honestly, when we looked at how far we needed to come, our digital was at about 65% of our mix, and today it's at 80% of our mix. And truthfully, consumers were telling us we needed to change, and we just weren't moving quick enough to do it. If you look at what was happening in linear TV, even before, I feel like the presentation prior to this set me up a little bit, but even before COVID, ratings were declining against the younger demo, but also against older demographics, maybe at a slower rate, but you were seeing 50 plus start to decline. And if you look at our products, we have people who are in the younger set as well as the older set. So we have to figure out how to be different. You also had a younger group of consumers who were growing up with content, quality content, that was available whenever and wherever they want it, and now not so young, myself, who were cutting the cord and had access to that. And then if you think about the CPG environment, you have people who are creating content, retailers, like an Amazon. That's great content, and I can get my content there if I want it. And then you also have it available on mobile or any platform that you want. So if we're not listening to the consumer, then we aren't going to be able to keep up. And so really we had to change our entire comms strategy, not just our video strategy. And being in service of them meant we had to look at the role video was playing in our plans. And so we invested in consumer journey work. I know that Lisa mentioned that as something that Hostess was also looking at, and we have consumer journey maps that we map our plans against and our strategies against, and we identify what are the moments that consumers are going to be most receptive to our brands as they go from the journey of entering our categories all the way down to purchase. And we can't own every single moment, but we really need to own the moments that matter, and how do we intercept them at those right places to be able to connect our brands with those moments. So for anybody in the audience, and I know I've talked to a few of you who are parents, one of those moments could be when your child is getting ready to go to preschool. We know that most of the kids who need to get into class have to be potty trained in order to be in the classroom with the teachers. And that's a perfect moment for our training pants or for our pull-ups brands to be able to connect with a parent to either provide education, tools and tips, what to expect, maybe connect with other parents so that they can understand what they've gone through in their journey. And so that's how we started to learn what consumers need and how we really put them at the center of all of our plans.
Right, and as I had said initially, that obviously became the focus, which is what then led you to not just within TV, as you said, but throughout throughout your organization. But when you focus on the TV, because obviously, especially when you're talking younger generations, although I think it spans everyone, your video is what people are looking at, they're spending time with. But in terms of your toolbox, say, and what transformations did you find that proved most valuable, especially on the TV or the video realm?
Yeah, so from a video perspective, we started to look at how do we build incremental reach. We still know that reach drives business outcomes for us, and that is what we are in service of. We have to drive business outcomes for the organization. And so we've been looking at how do we drive incremental reach across our businesses. And so we've been trying to reduce the duplication, manage the overlap that we see. And it's not easy. You can see from the landscape that there is a lot of complexity that exists. When you layer in audiences and data and the overlap of those things, it adds an additional layer of that. So we've been trying to figure out what is adding incrementality. And when we've started to reduce some of the supply inventory that is coming in, if you think about the programmatic landscape, we reduced the number of suppliers, and that actually helped increase our reach on some of our brands by as much as 18% or even 10 million households in some instances. So it may seem like an old metric, but there's still some low-hanging fruit for us in terms of how we get some incrementality out of that. But I don't want to make it seem like TV is not still important to us. It is. We've looked at our television plans and started to identify where are there still eyeballs watching programs, where is some of that quality inventory, and how does it still help drive value for our brands. So this year, we actually added college sports into our mix. We weren't running there, and if you look at some of our brands who are everyday brands in your household, that probably makes sense for us to be in those spaces, and we just weren't there. We were running some efficient schedules. We were a legacy TV advertiser who had basically a run of schedule on some of the cable networks. So that's adding some more quality program where families are drawn to that programming. We knew from research that that's an all-family gathering. And then we also wanted to be representative in how we were advertising and how we were coming to market, and we looked at who was buying our products and where we were driving growth. So we've doubled our investment in multicultural advertising. We spend 4 times more on Spanish language networks this year than we were the year prior. And then we also partnered with some of our content creators so that we had more culturally relevant assets to be able to run in those environments, so that we were not only pushing out content, but we were connecting with consumers to hopefully drive more engagement with that. And then I would say we've learned a lot about the content that we need. We don't have enough. We just don't have enough content or enough of the right content. We've been putting our 15-second ads out in places and then hoping that that's going to perform in the same way that it does within the linear space, and we're learning we have to adapt to the platform. So we've been partnering closely with some of our platform partners and their creative teams to understand how do we take our assets and adapt them to their platforms, learning from the insights that they have and knowledge that they have about their consumers to make them more relevant and drive better performance.
Well, and to sort of touched on it yesterday when I did the open, and as I talk with many of you, you're relying on the platforms, you're
Yep.
figuring out in terms of how well you're doing, but then when it comes across the board, as far as looking at the whole strategy, how are you managing to figure out, okay, do you care so much about the attribution in that sense? Or is it just more about, is it holistic? Or are you looking at each individual channel and then sticking with the ones that seem to be, producing for you?
I would say it's a mix of both. I mean, I think we're trying to see how everything is working together, but I think there is no great measurement solution. I think like a typical CPG, we do look at market mix modeling, MTA, we've looked at sales lift, but there's not a great, I don't think there's any great research that's giving us the single silver bullet of what's working. We've looked at individual channel performance, we've tried to see cross-channel attribution, but I would say the most important thing for us is trying to figure out how to keep testing and learning and iterating and figuring out what levers we can pull just to make things start to work better for us. We are starting to partner with a third-party partner that's looking across the channels to give us some insights of what those levers could possibly be. So I mentioned that we're looking for that incrementality and that incremental reach. So a couple of things that we've learned recently that we think are really interesting. Our insights and analytics team with that third-party partner has looked into the data that they've given us, and they have shown us that with our two DSP partners, we had almost a supply overlap of about 90-some%, like 95%. In order to help reduce that, we put some frequency caps on, we reduced the number of partners on the back end that could give us supply within that space, and we brought it down by over half. And we wouldn't have known that if we hadn't have subscribed to that third-party partner that was able to give us that data. The other thing that we learned, we're trying to apply data to get to more of a personalized strategy, making sure we're giving the right message to the right consumer. If you look at our products, Huggies, those consumers are only in the category for almost 2 years, for only 2 years. That's a quick in and out, and if we want to win, we have to understand who they are, where to reach them, and how to find them. Mm-hmm. We created 2 distinct audience segments with 2 different messages, thinking we were going to connect with person A and person B in a really meaningful way and just drive that connection and move them through. The data that our team dug into showed that those messages were not distinct. They were not going to 2 different people. There was actually overlap, and they were seeing both messages, which is what we did not want to have happen. The overlap was anywhere from 22% to 82%, depending on the partner at the partner level. So what we've had to do is really dive into how are we creating audiences? Are they distinct enough? And then is that actually translating in market execution to differentiation on the platforms? And we've learned that we might actually have to create audiences in a different way when we look at each of our partners and how we're executing. So there is a level of complexity and measurement that you need to execute when you're going to that granular personalization level. So I don't think any one measurement partner or one measurement approach is going to work in the short term. So what we've actually done is we have 4 different pilots going with 4 different measurement partners right now to figure out what the differences are to identify how we're going to move forward in the future, because it's become so complex and fragmented right now.
Well, and also just with the different channels and obviously the different age groups, there's so much that you have to really reach.
Yep.
How do you handle then the messaging part of it or the creative? It's just, is it changed up for everything? And that would be very, expensive, I would think.
It is. I mean, it can be cost prohibitive, but I think what we're trying to do is get really clear on the role that the video channels need to play. I mentioned that it changed our whole comm strategy when we thought about this, and the journeys are at the center of what we're doing. We're trying to be agnostic of where the video needs to run, and understanding that the incrementality is important and can come from anywhere. So what we're trying to do is say clearly, what is the role of television in our video strategy, and what does it need to do for a brand like Huggies? When you think about the fact that there's only 10 million households in a given year that we need to reach with babies in them, so what is a role like TV play in a mass reach, and what message do you need to give? Now remember, they're in the category 2 years, 10 million households, but then I also need the next 10 million that are going to come in to know about me, start thinking about me before they're ready to buy. So I'm trying to drive sales and also prime the next set of consumers. So there is a role, and that message might be different. It could be an awareness message. And then I think there is a role when you think about CTV or OLV or even social video, when you think about driving more of that quicker conversion in the shorter unit, and it can be more targeted. And the cost is different for both of those. If you think about us from a legacy linear TV advertising perspective, we're pretty advantaged in the linear TV space. In the digital space, it's a bit different, but some of those changes have actually allowed us to be more effective. So it balances out that cost differential. We're seeing the payback and effectiveness, and we're still driving positive business results. So creatively, we're able to play a little bit with the messaging depending on that clarity of role, but it does require us to be very clear on what we're trying to do and accomplish and who that message is going against. But I would be lying if I didn't say we have to test and learn. We're trying different messages in different places, and we're also exploring different routes. Like, do we want it to be a shoppable ad if we think we're closer to a conversion? Do we want to play with dynamic creative content to see if we can introduce some automation? Not an easy word for me to say, and I did leave early last night.
You did. No excuse.
I know. To see if we can learn from machine learning to see what message resonates with the right person in the right context. So we're trying different things creatively because it's not cost effective to produce all of that in a big cost production like you used to. And I mentioned earlier under advanced marketing capabilities, we're bringing an in-house creative agency inside KC to figure out how to get to content faster in a more cost-effective way. So I think we're exploring different models to try to keep pace with what's happening in the landscape with the fragmentation.
Well, and you mentioned you are pretty solid in linear, but so how are you using digital TV video? Are you using it to optimize what you're doing? Are you using it in conjunction, or are they very separate?
So I mentioned, like, we are 150 years old. Linear is still a big part of what we do, but we are changing our strategy as we map to the consumer journeys to be more video and not linear TV. I would say we went from a linear TV first strategy to a video strategy where CTV, OLV, and social are equal parts of what we're doing. And we are trying to build the reach through adding those things. And it took some education to help people understand what that meant in the organization, that TV was building a lot of frequency in our plans. If you think about some of the audiences that are, represented up there, if you think about Huggies being, younger first-time moms or even second-time moms or families. And I think there's a picture of the Depend logo up there of consumers maybe in their 50-plus range. That's very different viewing habits. But even with your heavy TV users, you're still building frequency and not reach if you're not adding in a CTV or an OLV, because you might get people who've never had a TV subscription in that audience that you're not touching with any of that if you do linear. So we are trying to be we call it video agnostic, which I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with, so that we are not favoring one over the other. But you can't ignore business results either, because I did mention too that we are in service of driving results. So you have to understand where there is going to be a business outcome, and then how do you get some of that knowledge and balance that with where consumers are. Because truthfully, I don't know that measurement has caught up with where consumers are.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, obviously what we started with in terms of you really looking at consumers at the heart of everything you do. So in connecting and getting that personalization and really connecting with all these different audiences, really.
Yep.
How are you doing that? What tools are working for you to make it that you can actually, reach everyone?
Well, I think we're using a bunch of different data sets, and I mentioned we have a pretty good and rigorous test and learn process, but we're also blessed and fortunate to have a lot of first-party data that we're able to apply to figure out who and how we should be targeting. We're using external data sets to do the same thing, and truthfully, we're learning a lot. I mean, personalization can be tricky. It is one of probably our biggest learnings and probably one of our biggest challenges is figuring out how personalized should we go in a privacy-compliant way, which I'm sure legal will be happy that I said today. But it's tricky. We've learned you can go too far. There's so much data that's available that you can get very fancy very quickly, and then you can lose sight of what you were trying to gain, and you can lose the scale behind your audiences very quickly, and then you don't drive the business outcomes you had intended to drive in the first place. So right now we're trying to figure out what's the right balance between getting very personalized and making sure you have the right message aligned to that versus making sure you're driving the scale to do it. And in some instances, we've had a lot of audiences, but we might not have had the right message to go with it, so it wasn't driving the impact that we needed to be able to pay that back for the data costs associated with it. So some of the learning that we have is that if you don't have the right audience, the right message, and the right placement, then you should be keeping those audiences together, because it's not worth the data cost, the ad serving that you're placing on it, unless you can marry all of those things up together.
Well, and so in terms of when you're going to different channels, because, everyone has each channel has its own personality. So again, that's something where you have to measure, okay, how much was it worth investing in that? So how are you choosing those channels? Because you can't be everywhere. I mean, in general, most brands shouldn't.
Yep.
And that people want to sort of just say, oh, we got to reach so many people, so let's go everywhere. But then that's not cost effective, and it doesn't necessarily prove productive. So what are you doing to sort of differentiate yourself in these different channels?
I think it goes back to the consumer journeys that I mentioned before. I mean, we know our consumers, we know their journeys with our products, we understand when and how they're going to be engaging with us and making sure that we're connecting in the moments that matter to us. We're trying to switch the mindset from being everywhere all the time. We can't compete on that mindset. We really have to understand when is it important to be in the market with the consumer and at the right time, and owning those moments so that we're relevant in that context. Because you're right, we can't be in every channel at every time in every moment. We have to be in those moments that matter. Like I said, when somebody's thinking about potty training and putting their child into preschool for the first time, we need to own a moment like that and make sure we're relevant and top of mind and creating that connection, because that's what's going to drive conversion and purchase. We can't build channel plans anymore. It's not going to work.
Well, so that person who has the kid for baby at 2 years,
Yep.
and then you don't want to lose them. Obviously there's then the life LTV that you want to keep. So are you following their moments as well as you you kind of can predict, okay, this is their next stage. They'll need pull-ups. They'll need whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Is that part of what you're doing?
It is part of it. So potty training in and of itself is a journey. If you've done it, you don't have success on the first try. It is a journey. And there's going to be setbacks, and that the parents are going to experience that. And so then you have to be there in that next moment. So the milestone might be preschool, entering preschool, but the journey is, okay, I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to maybe look at the products. Oh my goodness, that's really overwhelming. Which ones do I need? I'm going to go do some research. Or, okay, we're like 3 weeks into this and my kid has a setback and is refusing to do this. What do I do next? And so you have to figure out what opportunities exist along that journey for your brand to be relevant. That just might be one moment, and that might just be for one set of parents. Another set of parents might have a trigger to start potty training when they think about, hey, my kid's pretty advanced, pretty smart. Like, I think they're a baby genius. Like, they're going to do this really early. I was one of those parents. My kid was not a baby genius, and it took a really long time. So there are different triggers for different people. So really knowing your consumer and those moments give you those opportunities versus trying to be a channel planner, which I think we've done for years and isn't going to work in this day and age with all that fragmentation. You can't own a channel, you can't be on them all the time, and you can't max out TRPs like we used to.
Yeah. So, and then obviously, so you follow the consumer's full journey. So is that just as important at this point to, reaching the people, keeping those loyal customers, or is it more also about acquisition? Like, we need to bring in some more people?
Yeah. I mean, for us, it's going to be about driving penetration. I think when I talked about the category earlier, you look at some of those products, loyalty is important for some of them, but for a brand like a Huggies, I mentioned there's only people in the category for 2 years. You're not in training pants for very long, hopefully. So loyalty in those categories are pretty low. And if you think about what we're about to go through, or knock on wood, maybe not go through, I feel like we're going through the recession. Loyalty isn't very high. So you have to figure out always how you're bringing in new consumers. So we're always trying to figure out how we drive penetration. And if we can keep people in, we want to do that too. But we're always trying to figure out how to grow.
Well, that's true. Ever since COVID, especially, loyalty kind of went out one, you couldn't get a particular product
Exactly.
because of supply issues, or costs. Again, people are saying, well, I'd rather spend a little less. Although, and it's funny how because when I looked at, when you say Huggies, yes, only has the 2-year lifespan. Because you're looking at it at individual brands within your company, whereas my question was more within the full company. So do you look at every brand separately then, as opposed to putting them like, okay, we have you for Huggies, now let's get you as you move on, like, I don't know, tampons, I don't know,
No,
whatever.
no,
You know,
it's great.
is there a way to like keep the one brand and then cross that, like keep that brand and bring them to the next brand within?
It's great that you actually bring that up, because one of the things that we're trying to build to is lifetime value. If you think about the consumer, there are some instances where we might be willing to pay or invest more for a consumer when you think about a consumer first strategy. So bringing in somebody into the Huggies brand who is a first time mom, think about all the other things, or a first time parent, all the other things going on in his or her life. They might have a new home or be stocking their home. All of our products are probably relevant. So we do think about the potential to then cross-advertise some of our other products to people. So knowing who they are and what they might be receptive to is important. Again, having that consumer at the center. What other products might they be interested in? Conversely, you also don't want to alienate your consumer. So if they are only interested in, toilet paper or diapers, you don't want to be cross-promoting products if it's something that will then alienate them from the core of what they came into you for. So you really have to understand what your primary offering is, what you're primary interested in, whether they would be interested in something else from you.
Right. Well, and so now with all this transformation and everything you're doing, where are you seeing the most growth opportunity as you're moving forward?
So moving forward, we're really trying to focus on what is driving effectiveness. So I said incremental reach is important, reducing that duplication, trying to get to some sort of identification of what the right frequency is, but effectiveness. And it can be variable. It's very different across platforms, but it is important to us in terms of like, how is that going to unlock our growth moving forward in the future? So I mentioned that we're partnering with a third-party partner to help us identify how to unlock that, how to dig into the data and just make some of these incremental tweaks to the plan to help unlock some of that effectiveness growth. And that's really where we see the gains coming from. It'll be through media, and it will also be through our creative impact in the marketplace.
What is the biggest thing that you've found, with this journey and learning more about consumers and figuring out, the different strategies? What have you learned that's been the most valuable that you really want to take forward?
I think it is about making sure in the organization, because we are 150 years old, we've transformed so much in a very short period of time, not just due to COVID, but because of the realization we needed to do things differently. You got to get a few wins under your belt and build momentum and trust in the organization to get people to take the leap with you. So making sure that your ambition and agenda isn't so big that people can't see the small gains and wins along the way, to feel like they're coming along with you on the journey. So we've got a big ambition of creating digital transformation and driving effectiveness, but we have some milestones in that journey where people feel like they're part of the process. We talked about, seeing incremental reach gains, and showing the brands that is driving their business outcomes. It makes them feel like they're a part of the process and along for the ride. The other thing that we say quite often internally as a team and with our partners is, don't let perfection get in the way of progress. I think sometimes we overanalyze, overthink, and you can with all the data that's available, but sometimes you just need to move and you need to go do it. So I think making sure you're doing things and making things happen rather than sitting and talking about them and then never doing anything. I think you can do it very easily, but I think don't let perfection get in the way of your progress.
Yep, I think that's what we can all say that. All right, so let's see if anyone has any questions out there. Barbie can bring you, but we haven't. Actually, I would actually, while you were saying that, it made me think of when you're talking about doing things, testing and increment, just like what Jill was saying yesterday.
Yes.
So getting people on board with the 150-year-old organization.
Yeah.
Are you doing it the same way? Sort of testing small and earning their trust because, okay, it worked or it didn't, and moving forward that way?
Yeah, we definitely are. That what she talked about yesterday really resonated. I think making sure that a test is actually a test. You can't go to a brand organization and ask them to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars and then call that a test. That's a risk for the organization, not a test. So you have to come with more bite-sized things and get a case study. So what we've tried to do is find single brand opportunities or more cost-effective or affordable ways to show that things are working, and then we scale them. So it's test, scale, case studies, and then move them forward. Great. Finding small pockets of excitement in the organization and building it.
And still always customer first.
Always.
All right. Well, Stacie, we do have a question. Oh. Run.
I don't want to trip. Like, who was it? Stacie, this was great. Thanks for sharing your story and the work that you've clearly done so well at Kimberly-Clark in your year there so far. Tell me a little bit more about sort of the challenges. You've talked a lot about, testing and learning, your way into change.
Yep.
It sounds like with your overall media mix. Where do you think the pause point is for your organization? Is it on digital video specifically and growing that investment in digital video, or is it on the overall mix? I'm just curious.
The challenge, you think?
Yep, the challenges and the pause points that you're kind of feeling in your organization and how you're trying to overcome those.
I think one of the bigger challenges, and I was talking about this last night with somebody, is thinking about how we get into more social video, if I'm being honest, and how we diversify that mix. I think we've made some good leaps into connected TV and into OLV, and we understand how that helps add to our mix. I think the next step for us is going to be thinking about how social video can help extend some of that, and then what that looks like, because it's such a different space than what we're seeing in some of the other digital environments. And what does that content need to be? How do we think about that as a complement to what we're already doing, and how does that build on the base that we've already set up with the other video channels? It's a great question, and that I think is going to be our next one. We are already starting to talk about that and what that needs to look like.
And that great question was by Lisa Matheson from Hostess. You didn't introduce yourself. You've been here before. You know the drill. All right. Well, Stacie, thank you again
you
so
so
much. An
much.
awesome interview.
Thank you so much.